I opened with the courtroom flash forward, kept the three-act shape and beat placement from the analysis, but changed every name, setting, scheme, and resolution mechanism, and built in fixes for the plausibility gaps. The comments raised, early, they don't know my past, seeding, immediate pill disposal, instead of weeks of ingestion, an audio recorder instead of a hidden camera. When I walked into that boardroom on the 40th floor, my son leaned back in his leather chair and let out a short laugh through his nose, and my daughter-in-law didn't even bother looking up from her phone. I was wearing the same gray cardigan I'd worn every winter for 6 years, and I was carrying a cane I didn't actually need, just to look a little more pitiful, a little more finished. To them, I was already a formality, a signature waiting to be collected. I heard Marcus mutter something to Renee under his breath, and I heard her stifle a laugh behind her manicured hand. But then the attorney sitting at the head of the table looked up from her folder, and her eyes landed on me, and every ounce of color drained out of her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her pen stopped moving. Her mouth opened, and for 3 full seconds nothing came out. Then she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. "Wait, oh my God, it's you." Marcus frowned. Renee finally looked up from her phone. Every person at that table turned to stare at me. This frail old man in a cardigan holding a cane he'd bought for exactly this purpose, and not one of them had any idea who I actually was. My name is Walter Ashby. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years, before any of them ever knew me, I built and ran forensic audits for the Treasury Department, tracing dirty money through shell companies for people who thought they were smarter than the government. I want to say that to you now, honey, before I tell you the rest, because it matters. Everything that happens in this story only works because nobody in that room, including my own son, ever thought to ask what I did with my life before I became somebody's inconvenient old father. If you're with me on this one, do me a favor and hit that like button. It means more than you'd think from an old man sitting alone in his kitchen. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest of what happened to us. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because it helps me feel a little less alone out here. It started 5 months ago, on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, wet Ohio afternoon where the sky just sits on top of the trees and doesn't move. My wife Carol had been gone 14 months by then, and the house in Millbrook still smelled like her lavender hand soap because I couldn't bring myself to buy a different brand. I was retired, comfortable, not rich by Wall Street standards, but I'd built something solid over 3 decades. A paid-off house, a pension, and a small manufacturing company, Ashby Precision Tooling, that I'd started in my garage at 34 years old and grown into something that employed 61 people in 3 states. 2 years before Carol passed, I'd handed the daily operations over to our only son, Marcus, because Carol wanted to travel and I wanted to be the kind of husband who said yes to that. Marcus was 38, sharp, ambitious, the kind of young man who could talk a room into believing anything. He'd married Renee 8 years earlier, a woman with a marketing degree and an opinion about everything, including how I should be spending what she liked to call my remaining years. That Tuesday, I got a call from my longtime accountant, a woman named Doris who'd done my taxes since 1994. She sounded nervous in a way I'd never heard from her before. She told me the company's line of credit at Fifth Merchant Bank had been quietly restructured 11 weeks earlier, and that my personal home, the house Carol and I had raised Marcus in, had been used as collateral. I told her that was impossible. I hadn't signed anything. She told me my signature was on the documents, dated the same week I'd been in Florida visiting Carol's sister for her funeral. I sat down at my kitchen table and felt something cold spread through my chest. The same feeling I used to get 30 years ago when a set of numbers didn't add up and I knew, before I could even prove it, that somebody was lying to me. I called Marcus that evening. He answered on the second ring, his voice easy and warm, the voice he used when he wanted something. "Dad? Hey, what's going on?" I asked him about the line of credit, about the house. There was a pause, just a beat too long, and then he laughed it off. "Dad, come on. You signed a POA update 2 years ago when Mom was sick, remember? So we could keep the business moving if anything happened to you. It's just standard refinancing. Interest rates are better now. I'm actually saving us money." I told him Doris said my signature was dated during the funeral. He sighed. The exact particular sigh Carol used to give me when she thought I was being difficult on purpose. "Dad, you get dates confused sometimes now. It's okay. It happens. We've talked about this. We had not, in fact, talked about this. Nobody had ever suggested to me that I got dates confused, but I heard the shape of what he was doing, the same shape I'd watched grown men attempt in front of federal juries. Lay the groundwork early. Make the target doubt his own memory before he doubts you. I told him I wanted to see the original documents. He said, of course. Dad, we'll bring them by Sunday for dinner. Don't worry about any of it. Renee got on the phone before I could push further, her voice sweet as spoiling milk. Walter, honestly, you've seemed so much more forgetful since Carol passed. We're worried about you being alone in that house. Have you thought any more about the Cedar Grove community we mentioned? It's got a beautiful little garden, you'd love it. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. 31 years of reading liars for a living had left me with an instinct I couldn't turn off. A small, cold alarm bell that rings in the base of your skull when you're looking at a con, and not a coincidence. That bell was screaming. They came Sunday like they promised. Renee carrying a store-bought pie like it was some kind of peace offering. Marcus set a slim folder on my dining table. 3 pages, my signature at the bottom of each one, dated the exact week I'd been at that funeral in Tampa. I picked up the pages slowly, letting my hand tremble a little more than it needed to, and asked, in a small, confused voice, whether I'd really signed this. Renee reached over and squeezed my forearm with a gentleness that made my skin crawl. Dad, it's okay. We're handling it. That's what family is for. Marcus refilled my coffee without asking, and I watched, over the rim of my own cup, the two of them exchange a look. A small, satisfied look. The look of 2 people watching a fence come down exactly on schedule. The following Thursday, Renee showed up alone at 9 in the morning holding a small white pharmacy bag. She said she'd taken me to see Dr. Halloran, a name I had never heard in my life, and that he'd prescribed something to help with what she called my confusion episodes. She set an amber bottle of small blue capsules on my counter next to the coffee maker and told me, in the tone you'd use on a child, that I needed to take one every morning with breakfast. I looked at that bottle sitting there, and I heard the old voice in my head, the one that had cross-examined embezzlers and money launderers for 3 decades, the one that never once steered me wrong. It said one word, no. But I want to tell you something, sweetheart, and I want you to really hear it, because it's the part of this story I'm proudest of. I did not take that pill. Not the first day. Not ever. The moment Renee's car pulled out of my driveway, I opened that bottle, wrapped every single capsule in a paper towel, and put the whole bundle in a plastic sandwich bag at the very back of my freezer, behind a bag of frozen peas Carol had bought before she got sick. Then I filled the amber bottle back up with plain white Tic Tacs I'd bought at the gas station 2 days earlier, because the moment Doris called me about that loan, I already knew where this was heading, and an old investigator never walks into a trap without laying one of his own first. Every morning after that, Renee would call at 8:15 sharp to make sure I'd taken my medicine, and every morning I'd tell her, in a voice I let go soft and slow at the edges, that I had. I let my hands shake a little more each week when they visited. I let my sentences trail off mid-thought. I let Marcus finish my words for me at dinner. I let my hands shake a little more each week. I was building the exact portrait they wanted to paint of me, and I was doing it on purpose, with my mind sharper and colder than it had been in years. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks in, I drove myself 2 counties over to a private lab in Zanesville that Doris's brother-in-law ran, paid cash, and had 2 of those blue capsules tested. It took 9 days to get the results back. The compound was a heavy off-label sedative, the kind used in geriatric psychiatric wards for patients considered a danger to themselves, combined with a drug that specifically targets short-term memory formation. Not a vitamin, not a supplement. A chemical cage, built to make a healthy 66-year-old man look, on paper, exactly like a man who needed someone else to run his life for him. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time after I read that report. I want to be honest with you, I cried. Not for myself. For the boy I raised, who I once watched cry over a dead sparrow he found in the yard when he was 7 years old, gently burying it under the oak tree because he couldn't stand the thought of anything suffering. I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me at dinner anymore. But grief has a way of turning into something useful if you let it. And mine turned into resolve. I started keeping a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a tube of lipstick, tucked into the breast pocket of my cardigan every single time they came to the house. Not a hidden camera with some blinking light for them to spot. Nothing they'd ever think to look for on an old man who could barely work his own television remote. Just a little recorder, running quietly against my heart, catching every word. And they gave me plenty. 3 weeks into the fake medication, Renee came by to help me organize my financial drawer, and I let her think I'd dozed off in my recliner in the next room. I heard her murmur to Marcus on the phone, thinking I couldn't hear a thing. "He's basically gone, Marcus." The lawyer said as long as we've got the medical documentation and 2 doctors on record, the judge signs off on the conservatorship without even blinking. Once we've got it, we can sell the Millbrook property and roll the tooling company under Ashby Ventures. My name, not his. He won't even understand what's happening. I lay there in that recliner, eyes closed, breathing slow and even, listening to my daughter-in-law describe erasing my entire life's work like she was reading a grocery list, and something in me went very, very quiet and very, very certain. The lawyer she mentioned was a man named Griffin Locke, a name I recognized instantly, because 30 years ago Griffin Locke had been a green, terrified, 26-year-old associate I'd caught falsifying a witness statement in a fraud case I was building. I could have ended his career that day with one phone call. Instead, I sat him down, told him exactly how close he'd come to a felony, and gave him one chance to walk it back and do it right. He did. He went on to build a respectable little practice in 3 different states, and every single Christmas for the next 28 years, he sent me a card thanking me for that mercy. I hadn't heard from him in almost a decade. Now here he was, representing my son, drawing up the very documents meant to strip me of my rights, having absolutely no idea whose father he was destroying. Over the next 6 weeks, I did not confront them. That's the hardest thing to explain to people who haven't lived it, honey. The discipline it takes to smile at people who are poisoning you, to say thank you when they tuck a blanket over your knees, to let your own son pat your shoulder like you're a pet he's grown tired of. But I had spent 3 decades building airtight cases against men far smarter and far more dangerous than my son, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the worst thing I could do was strike before the trap was fully built. So I gathered. I recorded 11 separate conversations. I photographed the loan documents with the forged signatures. I drove myself, in secret, to 2 different independent physicians for full cognitive evaluations, both of which stated plainly, in writing, that I was of entirely sound mind, sharper than average for my age, with no evidence whatsoever of memory impairment. I mailed copies of everything, quietly, to Doris, and to an old friend from my Treasury days named Priscilla Vance, who now sat as a federal magistrate 2 states over, just in case anything happened to me before this was finished. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning in the Muskingum County Courthouse, Courtroom 2, presided over by a judge I had never once heard of, a man named Judge Aaron Voss. Griffin Locke stood at the front of that room in a gray suit that cost more than my first car, and he opened with the same tragic little speech I imagine men like him give 100 times a year. "Your Honor, we are here under the most painful of circumstances. Mr. Ashby's family has watched this proud, brilliant man slip away from them over the past year, and they've made the incredibly difficult decision to step in before real harm comes to him or his considerable assets." He walked the judge through 2 forged medical evaluations. He played a video Renee had recorded on her phone of me shuffling through my own kitchen at 2 in the morning in my bathrobe, mumbling Carol's name, a moment they had staged by waking me from a dead sleep and following me with a phone light in my face, until I was disoriented enough to look exactly as broken as they needed. I watched Judge Voss's expression soften with real, uncomplicated sympathy, and I let my chin stay down, my hands folded in my lap, trembling right on cue. "I want you to understand something about that moment, honey, because it's the part that used to keep me up at night for 30 years in courtrooms just like it. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a room right before the truth breaks the surface. You can feel it in your chest before you hear it in the air." I sat in that quiet for 3 full seconds, letting Marcus and Renee sit inside their victory, letting them taste it all the way down, because I wanted them to remember exactly how it felt in the second before I took it away. I lifted my head. I let my shoulders come back. I stopped my hands from shaking, all at once, like flipping a switch, and I looked directly at Judge Aaron Voss for the first time since I'd walked into that room. His pen dropped out of his hand. "Walter," he said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle. Walter Ashby, from Treasury, the Kessler case. I hadn't recognized the name Aaron Voss because 22 years ago, when I'd built the case that sent a corrupt state comptroller named Kessler to federal prison for embezzling $40 million in pension funds, Aaron Voss had been a 29-year-old junior prosecutor on my team, so green he could barely speak in front of a grand jury. I had spent 4 months personally mentoring him through that case, teaching him how to build a cross-examination brick by brick until a liar had nowhere left to stand. He'd gone on to a career I'd followed with quiet pride from a distance for 2 decades, never once imagining our paths would cross again like this, in a small county courthouse, on the worst day of my life. "Your Honor," Griffin Locke said, stepping forward, his composure cracking at the edges. "Is everything all right? Do we need to call for a—" "Sit down, counselor," Judge Voss said, and his voice had gone from shaking to iron in the space of 1 sentence. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Marcus had gone white as paper beside his lawyer. Renee's hand had frozen halfway to wiping a tear that had, until 60 seconds ago, been entirely real for entirely the wrong reasons. "This man," Judge Voss continued, standing now, his voice carrying to every corner of that small courtroom, spent 31 years dismantling the most sophisticated financial fraud operations in this country's history. He built the fraud statutes half of this state's prosecutors still use today. And you have just spent 20 minutes trying to convince me he can't remember his own name. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan and set the small silver recorder on the defense table in front of me. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice came out the way it used to in front of grand juries 30 years ago, low, level, and absolutely certain. "I'd like the court to hear something." I pressed play. Renee's voice filled that courtroom clear as a bell. "He's basically gone, Marcus. Once we've got the conservatorship, we roll the tooling company under Ashby Ventures. My name, not his." I have never in my life heard a room go that silent that fast. Judge Voss did not adjourn for deliberation. He revoked the emergency conservatorship petition on the spot, declared it null from its very inception, and stated for the record that I was in full and complete possession of my faculties. Then he looked at the bailiff and asked him to contact the county sheriff's office directly, because what he had just witnessed constituted sufficient evidence of elder financial abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to warrant immediate arrest warrants for both my son and my daughter-in-law. 2 deputies came through those courtroom doors within 11 minutes. I watched them put handcuffs on Renee first, her sobbing so hard she could barely stand, and then on Marcus, who would not look at me, not once, not even when they walked him past the defense table close enough that I could have reached out and touched his shoulder. Griffin Locke stayed behind after the deputies led them out. He came and sat across from me at that empty defense table, his hands shaking slightly, and he said, very quietly, "Walter, I swear to God, I didn't know it was you. I never would have taken this case if I'd known." I looked at him for a long moment. I told him I believed him. And I told him that the difference between him at 26 and Marcus at 38 was that Griffin had been given 1 chance and had the sense to take it, and Marcus had been given 38 years of them and burned every single one. Renee tried to reach me in the hallway outside the courtroom as they walked her toward the transport elevator, dropping to her knees, her cuffed hands grabbing at the cuff of my pants, screaming that I was still family, that I couldn't do this to them, that she was sorry, so sorry. "Please, Dad, please." I looked down at her for a long moment. I thought about Carol's lavender soap still sitting by my bathroom sink. I thought about the little boy who buried a sparrow under an oak tree so it wouldn't be alone. And I told her, quietly, that she stopped being my family the day she put a stranger's chemicals in a bottle and told me it was medicine. Then I stepped out of her grip and walked down that marble hallway alone. And for the first time in 5 months, I didn't feel like I was performing weakness. I felt, for the first time in longer than that, entirely and completely like myself. The case moved fast once it was in front of an actual investigation. Marcus pled guilty 8 months later to forgery, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy, and was sentenced to 11 years in a federal facility in Kentucky. Renee took a plea deal that gave her 7 years and a permanent revocation of her business license in the state of Ohio. The tooling company, my company, the one I built in a garage with 2 second-hand lathes and a loan from my own father, is being run today by Doris's son, a quiet, sharp young man named Elias who I have come to trust the way I once trusted my own boy. I set up a trust with the proceeds from the sale of two commercial properties. Marcus and Renee had already tried to move, and that trust now funds legal defense for elderly Ohioans facing exactly the kind of conservatorship fraud that nearly took my life out from under me. We've helped 14 families so far. 14. It's autumn again now, almost a year to the day since Doris made that first phone call. I still live in the house in Millbrook. It still smells faintly of lavender, and some mornings I stand in the kitchen with my coffee and I let it. I sit on the back porch most evenings now, and the quiet doesn't scare me the way it used to right after Carol died, because I've learned something these last 12 months that I want to leave you with. If you've stayed with me this long, the people who love you the most in this world will never once make you doubt your own mind. Confusion is not a symptom you should ever have to defend yourself against inside your own family. And the quietest, gentlest old man in the room, the one everyone assumes has nothing left to give, may simply be waiting, patiently, for the exact right moment to remind you precisely who he's always been. If this story meant something to you tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Tell me down in the comments, honestly, what you would have done in my position and where in the country you're listening from tonight, because knowing you're out there really does keep an old man good company.